It's no secret that I own a lot of Canon camera gear. And every time I make a new video reviewing a piece of camera gear that I bought, there's always some sentiment of this camera actually sucks and you're just saying good things about it because you're a Canon fanboy. So today I want to address the question, is the real reason I invested tens of thousands of dollars into my Canon equipment because I'm just a Canon fanboy shill, or is there a deeper reason why I trust this brand to help me earn my living? And I want to talk a little bit about the broader conversation of how we talk about camera gear and brands as a community. Let's get some of my qualifications straight first. Hi, my name is Delaney. I run a photo and video production company called Delaney Media, doing photography and video full-time for the past 3 years and part-time for about 4 years before that. I've been shooting on Canon cameras continuously since I was 13 years old, for the past 12 years. I have no affiliation with Canon. They've never paid me for anything. They've never sent me product, and they most likely never will. All of my Canon camera gear was purchased myself. In recent years, there's been a lot of talk about Sony is so much better than Canon, and the only defense people shooting Canon have is that it's got great colors. So I want to tell you why I have chosen to shoot on Canon for so long. I'll be the first to say I'm actually not a big fan of a lot of the decisions Canon's made over the years. They were well behind Sony for a long time until recently in the mirrorless game. Until recently, they lacked a lot of the professional features that video shooters look for. They've artificially limited certain features in their lower end cameras because, in my opinion, they want to make sure that their lower end cameras don't compete with their higher end options. And I also don't like how they've limited access to the RF mount, artificially creating a monopoly for the lenses that you can use on these cameras. The reason I shoot Canon has a lot to do with my first camera and my access to camera as I was learning and growing up. When I was 13, my parents bought this Canon T3, and this is the camera that I learned on and used for several years. I got extremely comfortable with it. In high school, all the cameras in my photography lab were Canon. And at that time, I was watching Casey Neistat and Peter McKinnon, and they were shooting on Canon. At the end of high school, I went off to university for photography, and I upgraded to a Canon 60 Mark II. All the cameras and lenses in my school's rental studio were also Canon. By the time I was out of school and starting my career, I had been shooting on Canon cameras almost exclusively for 8 years. It's just what I was familiar with, and now, here a few years later, I have a Canon R5 Mark II, a Canon R6 Mark II, and the Canon PowerShot V1, along with 4 fairly high-end lenses. So am I an exclusive Canon shooter? Based on my history, you could say that, but I'm definitely not opposed to shooting on different camera systems or even switching entirely. Last year, for example, Nikon sent me a test sample of the Z6 III to try out, and I had a great time shooting with that camera. I started shooting on Canon because it's what was available to me. I continued shooting on Canon because it was familiar and fast for me. And I still shoot on Canon today because I'm comfortable with it, and that comfort brings speed and efficiency when I'm shooting. And honestly, no other camera has given me a good enough reason to go through the hassle of selling all my equipment and making the full switch over. Which brings me to the reason why I am continuing to shoot with Canon. The cameras I own are great cameras. Are there better cameras out there? Sure, but I've continued with Canon for the same reason many longtime photographers and videographers continue with the same brand, because there isn't a good enough reason to go through the extreme annoyance of switching camera systems. Sure, maybe Sony has better low light or Nikon has better glass selection, I don't know. But slight improvements in certain areas, now that I have invested into this system, are just not worth the time and energy it takes to sell all of my equipment and buy new stuff. When I upgraded from my R6 to my R6 Mark II, I had a lot of people telling me, oh, just switch to Sony. But unfortunately, it's not that simple. Selling camera gear online takes potentially months for the higher end items that have fewer buyers. I know because I've sold camera gear online before, and I know a lot of other people who have as well. So I'd have to hold on to everything and sell it bit by bit. On top of that, I definitely can't get the brand new value out of this camera gear selling it used, which means I'm going to be taking a significant loss by selling all this stuff. And even if I buy similarly priced items from a different camera brand, I'm still going to be taking that loss and taking a lot of money out of my own pocket in order to make that switch. Because in order to buy the same quality stuff that I'm currently using, I would have to sell my current stuff for cheaper than it would be new and then buy new versions of that stuff. Does that mean I'm stuck with Canon forever? No, but it does mean I would need a pretty good reason to go through this multi-month long, time-consuming and expensive process of switching camera systems. But beyond just the headache of switching, why is Canon actually still a decent choice in 2025? Well, here are maybe some more objective reasons other than just my opinion as to why Canon is actually still a pretty solid option. Autofocus. I've played with Fujifilm Panasonic, Nikon, Hasselblad cameras, and none of them come close to how good the Canon autofocus is. Sony is the only other option that's good enough to be comparable. That's not to say any of these other brands are particularly bad with autofocus, but with Canon cameras, I just don't even think about it anymore. My autofocus is so good and I can rely on it so well that I've just learned to not even think about it most of the time, which means I can focus more on my composition and my camera settings and posing my subjects. I trust the camera, and even in difficult lighting situations, 99% of the time, it hits focus. I haven't had to throw an otherwise good photo because I missed focus in years. Then there's the infamous Canon color science. People like to say that good color science is the only argument people have for shooting on Canon. And I've also heard people say that if you're a good editor, you can get good colors and good results out of any camera, whether it's photo or video, given you know what you're doing in post-production. And this is true to a point. If you know what you're doing, you can manipulate the colors of any camera to get the results you want. But I've had projects where I was shooting on my Canon camera and I had a second videographer shooting on a Sony camera, and the amount of extra time I had to spend color correcting each Sony clip to get it to look as good as the Canon did straight out of camera was significant. Yes, you can achieve virtually any look you want in post-production, but the time saved by starting with a really good foundation is really valuable, especially when you're fully booked up and you're working a lot on different projects, and the amount of time it takes to get that project completed matters a lot. Ergonomics. I'll admit this is definitely more of a preference thing. I think it mostly has to do with the size of your hands. But if you have large-ish hands, no camera feels quite as good and secure as Canon. Nikon is the closest thing that I felt that feels really secure in my hand. I even took the Nikon camera out into a kayak and held it over the water for some photos, and it was pretty good. But every other camera brand I've tried has too small and too blocky of a grip to feel like it's really secure in my hand. Canon's grip gives me the confidence to hold my camera with one hand, even with expensive glass on it, even over a ledge or over water. In all my years with Canon, my camera has never once slipped out of my hand. But again, if you have smaller hands, I can understand why you'd prefer a smaller camera. The last point I'll touch on is switching to Sony. I know a lot of creatives who have switched from Canon to Sony and been really happy with their choice. I've asked a bunch of Sony shooters in person and over threads what made them switch and what they felt was better with Sony than Canon. In recent years, it bugs me a bit because a lot of Sony shooters talk about Sony as if it's an objective fact that it's better than Canon. But when you dig a bit deeper and figure out why, it's usually Sony has better low light performance, which is absolutely true, and everything else tends to be a preference thing. For the record, I'm not saying that Canon is the best choice out there ever, or that you should be shooting on Canon. I think shoot on whatever camera you like. Like I talked about earlier, Canon has its flaws like any camera brand out there. But if you do have some reasons why Sony is objectively better than Canon over just something you prefer, I would love to hear it in the comments, because so many people have switched to Sony over the past few years, and I am really curious to understand why that is. Despite how I may come across here, I am very open-minded to using different cameras, and ultimately it's not that big of a deal. Which brings me to my takeaway, which is ultimately I want all of us, myself definitely included, to take a little bit of a step back from the brand wars stuff for a minute. And remember, in 2025, basically every camera is really good. The entry point for high quality photos and videos has never been lower. And we're in a really cool time where photography and videography have never been more accessible. And I also want to remind you that brands competing with each other is good. When one company does something better than the other companies, it pushes the whole industry to move forward and gives us, the consumer, better access to more features. At the end of the day, as long as you're going out, shooting, and being creative, it doesn't matter what camera you're using. I think it's easy, especially when you're in this content creation space, to get caught up in the discussion of all the specs and all of the nitty-gritty details of this camera is this much better than the other camera in this area. And I'm absolutely guilty of this. And seeing how people react to reviews of new cameras in my comment section and other creators' comment sections, I think this is a larger problem in the community. I like getting hyped about new gear, and I think the passion for new camera gear and finding this stuff so cool is a part of what makes it so awesome that this can be our job. We're passionate about the tools we use. There's not a lot of industries where people are so invested in what they're doing that they are this excited about the tools that they use when they come out. Just never forget that being creative and having fun is the end goal here, and you can do that with any camera. So am I Canon fanboy? I guess that's for you to decide, but I don't think so. I recently bought the R5 Mark II, and I'm looking at adding some new prime lenses to my collection in the near future. So I'm actually not in a position to buy any new cameras or switch systems, no matter what the brand. I'm happy to use what I currently have for the next few years at least. But if the timing is right and I have a good enough reason, I absolutely would switch camera systems, because I want to use the tool that allows me to do my best work regardless of who made it. That's all I got for you. Thank you guys for watching. I'll catch you in the next one.